ideally they're a 3 or 4 phase contributor on teams. If you're taking a receiver that's going to be an interior type player, a slot type body type, well, maybe he's your returner. And the makeup of our roster right now with 3 starters currently under contract, those are the guys that are going to be playing a majority of the snaps, and you need a guy that can be able to fill in somewhere. What that body type looks like, what that is for the draft spot, and all that can vary. But you need guys that do have some versatility if they're going to play in your 4th and 5th spot, and they're going to be in a special teams role or a return role, or however that works. You need guys that can do a little bit more than just one thing. Ideally, doesn't mean that you're limited to that, but you do need some versatility if you're in that spot.
I guess every draft now has like so many receivers. It's like, is that the most notable thing again? Where you just look, it's like, gosh, this is what's going to be every year. You look in those middle rounds and you feel like you can see guys that you can see a great future, and you see that this year too.
Yeah, these receiver classes are generally deep. There's going to be a lot of them every year. That's just because that's the nature of what college football has become. There's always going to be receivers at all levels of the draft. There's always going to be your high-end talent. They're going to be there every year. And there's going to be your mid-round guys, and there's going to be guys that have traits or guys that have value somewhere in terms of whether it's, again, special teams, returnability, all those things. The classes are going to be relatively deep every year. You're going to have the ability to find receivers probably every year to some varying degree in every round. For the foreseeable future, I think it's sort of the way that the NFL has been leaning. So there's going to be plenty of options over the course of the draft, I think, if you're looking for that spot. For really every team in the league, it's going to look like that.
Do you see a lot of guys that could potentially contribute on special teams and help on offense?
Yeah, absolutely. And, ideally, if you're looking for a guy that's going to fill a role, you want a guy that's going to be, you hope that's going to ascend. You draft them and you hope in a year or two that they've now outplayed that 4th role into a 3 or into a 2 or however that works. Sometimes those numbers are a little bit generic. I mean, they got to fit skill sets, and if you're a slot versus we use guys a lot of different ways. But the point being is that you hope when you draft a guy, you're not just drafting him to be a 4 and a special teams player forever. You hope that that's their starting point, and they ascend from there, and they develop and grow potentially into being more than just whatever that spot is that you're hoping they fill for this current year. You hope down the road in the future they project something more than that. So there's a lot of guys in the draft that look like that. This year in particular.
With T and Jamar, you drafted 2 receivers very highly. Obviously, fewer weaknesses in their game. When you're drafting a mid-round receiver, how is that different? Do you maybe, have to live with a certain type and structure and strength of a player compared to the well-rounded nature of a T and a Jamar?
Yeah, you try to project some. When you start getting into the 3rd and 4th and 5th rounds, and you get deeper into the draft, and there's guys that are going to have traits that you like. There's guys that might have tape that looks really good, and they may not have the measurables as much. That's why they're going to be sitting there in the 4th and the 5th round or the 6th round. So you try to do your best to sift through all of the things that are available, whether that be, again, traits that are developed, that you want to develop, something that jumps out, whether maybe they ran really, really fast, and you're drafting that. You get some speed, and you see where they fit from there. But again, all these guys, they got to develop a little bit to some degree. T was really a 1st-round pick. Jamar was a top 10 pick. Those guys are kind of ready-made pros. As you start getting later in the draft, there may be some things that you have to develop, you have to coach, and you may not get a perfect prospect in that regard when you compare them to Jamar and T. Those guys are pretty close to perfect prospects in that sense, where they're going to come in and impact immediately. So you do your best job to try to scout. That's really where the scouting part comes in. Everyone knows that Jamar's a good player. Everyone knows that T's a good player. When you start finding guys in the mid to late rounds, that's when scouts and coaches, when we're grinding on that tape, earning our money, that's where we're trying to find guys where we feel like can project into something at some point in their career, whether it be making a roster, as simple as that, or projecting into a guy that can play on some teams and eventually ascend into a contributing role. So it's a wide range of things that happen, but that's where the draft is fun for us, is to try to find guys that can fit, that may not be the ones that everyone thinks is a top ready-made pro from the get-go.
What you just talked about with receiver, does that apply to the tight end position? I mean, is the tight end position, mid to late rounds pretty solid as well?
Yeah, I'll be really interested to see how the tight end position works this year in the draft, probably because the way they got paid in the offseason.
Right.
These tight ends contracts, they all kind of bubbled up a little higher than maybe people in the league anticipated. But there's value in tight ends and good tight ends. And so how will that translate in the draft this year? We'll find out. You know,
Yeah.
are some of these guys, there's probably not a consensus first round tight end this year, but there's some really good players. Will those guys get bubbled up, or will they kind of stay right in the range where we think they might be? Remains to be seen. But there's good depth at the tight end spot. There's a bunch of different unique types of players, and tight end is very similar to receiver in the sense that sometimes there's pass catchers, sometimes there's blockers, sometimes there's guys that do a little bit of both. Neither one that particularly stand out, but they're just solid players. And then there's guys that project that are a little bit more skill type players, where you're trying to figure out how do they fit in your offense, where do they fit, because they're more receiver-ish than they are tight ends. But there's a wide range of options at that position in this draft, and it'll be interesting to see how those guys either bubble up or fall down, however that works. It's going to be interesting. But there's a lot of good, solid players at the tight end spot in this draft class, and again, it'll be interesting to see where they fall.
Along those lines, you signed Hayden Hurst for a year. So how big of a need is adding tight end depth?
I would say it's a need in the sense that, you know, we have 3 tight ends under contract, and we're certainly looking to add some, and where that comes and how that looks. We'll see how it shakes out. But you know, we're doing our homework on those guys. It's a good class. There's some ones that could be available to us in certain spots that we might feel good about. But you know, we're really excited about Hayden and what he brings, and a chance for him to prove himself. And you know, obviously, if he plays really well, he might obviously be a guy that we'd be looking to potentially re-sign down the road. Obviously, those things all got to play themselves out over the course of the next 12 months. But you know, that's a position that's contract-wise and numbers-wise is one that we're certainly looking at.
Is
Do
there
you think
room-
that has evolved? Sorry.
Is there room for a receiver-ish tight end in this offense?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we'll feature the guys that need to be featured, and I think that we're in a nice place because we got 3 receivers that are really good. And CJ was really productive for us in a role that really wasn't a feature role, but it was one that we found ways to get the ball to him, and then he found ways to be productive when he had the ball. And you can do a lot of different things formationally in the pass game. You know, Hayden opens up some things that are a little bit different. He's a different type of player than CJ. But there's definitely a way to feature tight ends, and pass game tight ends are guys that can be really dangerous and serve as a mismatch and a piece you can move around your formation and try to gain mismatches for them and for other players when you have them in the lineup. So there's definitely room for tight ends, and again, however the players fall to us, we'll have a plan for those guys and a way to feature them for the same reason. You know, like Chris Evans, we've found ways to feature Chris Evans in that role. So there's different types of roles of guys that we can use and move around and feature, and pass game tight end is really dynamic as one of them, and hopefully Hayden rises to that challenge to start, and we'll see what happens in the draft.
Do
Brian,
you
how
think
much
the
does,
style- Do you think that style of tight end fits, you know, the first style of tight end fits this offense better?
Oh, absolutely.
CJ fits better than CJ did?
I wouldn't say better. I just say they're different. They're different players. Both of them have different strengths, different weaknesses. But I think Hayden fits nicely for us, and I think he'll fill the role that we need him to fill well. And I'm excited. I'm excited to get him see him on the field and running around. I know he's a first round talent. I mean, he got picked in the first round based on his athletic ability and his ability as a player. So hasn't probably gone exactly the way he wanted his career to start, but I think he's hungry to prove that he belongs as a legitimate tight end threat in this league, and I think that I'm excited to see if we can get that for him.
For how much y'all play 11, is it important? How much more important is that for your tight end to be really versatile because of how often y'all use those one tight end sets?
That's one of the keys that we're looking for a guy that's going to be able to play for us. You know, because we are an 11 personnel offense more often than not. We have some 12 and 13, but primarily we are going to have 3 receivers in the field. Those are guys that are our best players, and so the tight end spot can be as featurable as we can make it, if that's the case, if there's somebody that's worthy of that, or sometimes we need guys that can just do the job that is required of that spot, and that's being good in the run game, being productive in the pass game, but not necessarily being the guy that we have to get the ball to. They can be dynamic underneath, find ways to get the ball in checkdowns. There's a lot of different ways that you can use a tight end, and they don't always have to be top-level receiving threats to be productive.
You signed 3 starting offensive linemen. How does that change what you need on the line in this year's draft?
You know, it makes the need less pressing. Now we got 3 real legitimate starters, and you have Jonah there, so you got really 4 starters and a spot open for competition at left guard. And so if there's one available that fits and we like a lot, we certainly would be open to taking that player. But it definitely doesn't make it feel as pressing that we have to have a guy at a certain spot, or else we're going to fall. You know, if you don't take one in the first 50 picks, you're going to fall off as far as what's available to you. That doesn't feel the same as it's felt in years past, because I feel really good about the guys that we have competing. I feel really good about the guys that we signed in free agency, and the guys that, again, have played for us. So it's going to be, the nice thing about it is you can pick a guy if you've got falls that you like, or you don't have to, and it can go to another position. And so I think that's what we've done a really nice job of over the past 3 years here, is supplementing our team with free agency, whether it be on the defensive side of the ball or on the offensive side of the ball. This year we went out and were a little more aggressive, signing free agents. Now allows the draft to fall to you a little bit. You can make some determinations more based on what the best players are for the team, less about the actual position of need that's, you know, sometimes can be more glaring than other years. I don't think we have as many glaring positions of need on offense this year than we have in the years past.
Brian, how much does it help you that you guys do so many different things on offense going into a draft? Maybe there's more of a comfort that no matter who you draft, like a Chris Evans last year, you're going to be able to find a role for that particular player to help you out.
That's what the best part to me of our system has always been. It's always been a flexible system. We've been able to feature players that we feel like can help us, that can win a matchup. Because really in the NFL, you get to the third down in the red zone, a lot of it becomes matchup-based football. If you got guys that can go win one-on-one, that's what you're looking for. And I think we found quite a few of those guys. And you put them in the best position to succeed. Not every guy is going to be a vertical threat. Not every guy is going to be someone that's going to win on an option route. There's a lot of different ways you can help guys win. And I think that's one of the things that we've done well over our time here is put guys in position to have success and be in matchups that they can go win and help us move the ball down the field and score points. And so we got a lot of guys that we feel good about that can win at all positions on our offense right now. And so I'm excited about that, and I think our players are too.
What have the early returns been on Jackson Carman's offseason so far?
You know, hard to say because we don't have much involvement with him. I know he's been down working out pretty heavily as far as I hesitate to say where he's at, but from everything I've gained from him as his offseason has been productive. He's been doing the right things. He's been taking care of himself the way he's supposed to, and I'm hoping for a really nice jump from his first year into his second year. Like all players, that first offseason when you finally get a chance to be a pro, I think changes the dynamic. It allows guys to really improve because you get to a point when you're just doing the draft stuff where it's your college football season and it's all draft and it's visits, and then all of a sudden you get to the place and you really have been training for combines and pro days and not football, and then now there's a whole learning of the offense and then the training game. So it's just a really stressful time, I think, for young players. And then to finally go through a season and take a step back and look at where you could be better, look at the things you did well, things you didn't do well, and I think there's a chance for a big jump from most players from year one to year two, and Jackson's no different. I hope that he comes back and we see a different type of player than we did his first year. Mature, better, stronger, all those things.
You got three offensive linemen you drafted last year, second, fourth, and sixth round. They all fit that bill that you're talking about.
Yep.
You know, first year guys with that. Okay, now I know what the NFL's about, and you come back the second year. Do you anticipate all three of them to make a significant jump?
Yeah, that's the plan. And I think you throw Isaiah in there too, a guy that played quite a bit
Right.
As a young player. You always want development on the offensive line. You always want young guys that are ascending, guys that have played a little bit, guys that continue to get better, because you always need your depth. And the better that room is from top to bottom, the better you're going to be over the course of a season, because as we know, there's always guys in and out of the lineup up front because it's physical. Guys do get dinged up, they do get hurt. You do rely on guys to step in and play. That happens every year. And so I think if you have young depth that's developing, that's exciting, and you want those guys to continue to make jumps and keep pushing. At the end of the day, the competition is going to make them all better as it is. You want guys to be competing. You want guys that have jobs to be worried about the guy coming up from underneath them. As you know,
Yep.
There's something about that makes a team better. And so we're always trying to build the competition and build those guys' development, and hope that we keep adding good young players that keep ascending. So I'm excited about the youth on all our positions, particularly up front. We've added a few in the last couple of years.
Do you spend much time looking at quarterbacks when you don't need one?
I think it's always good to have an awareness of what the class looks like. I think it affects the draft, how the draft might fall, where guys might be available. But I would say that I personally do not spend a ton of time drilling down on those guys. I know Dan Pitcher does, and that's part of his evaluation process. He watches all of them, grades them all like you would normally grade every year, whether you need one or not. But for me, my time is a little bit more better spent on some of the positions that we might be targeting, some of the later round picks, however that may shake out. But I do watch them. I do have an awareness of them. I would not say I'm the foremost authority on where they would fall or what their draft stock might be, but I think you always should have awareness of what the quarterback class looks like, because they may come around in 4 years and they may be available, and you have to at least remember an evaluation on top of what their pro film would look like. So it's always good practice to know the class and feel good about where you think those guys stand. But I don't spend more than a small bit on each of them at this point.
So you're not drafting Burrow's replacement.
No, not this.
Just wanna make
No, not yet.
Breaking
Yeah,
news.
write that down. Yeah.
Headline.
Yeah.
Brian, do you guys see Identity as more of a swing tackle rather than an interior player, or?
He's an interior player, that has the ability to swing out if he needed to. But we'll try to keep him. That's where he's played for us recently. Try to keep his development on track that way. And if he needs to swing out at some point, he has the ability to do that. But he doesn't really need to have that ability currently. We have guys at the tackle spots. So he's going to compete at the interior because that's really where we feel like he's best suited. But he does have the ability to swing out should you get in a pinch or should you need that spot, particularly on game days. When you're talking about dressing 8 guys, you want guys that have versatility.
So Prince is his swing. So
Yeah,
Prince is his swing.
Prince is the swing tackle currently as it stands, because Lyell's here and Jonas at the left side. So that's kind of how those guys will sort out, and again, see what the draft brings. But there's Akeem will be primarily an inside player.
Same question. You view Deontay as a guard and Trey Hill as a center. Is that right?
Trey Hill's an interior swing player,
Okay.
so he plays center and guard. He has the ability to play both. And then Deontay is going to play more tackle than he is going to play guard at this point, because again, you're trying to get guys a spot to develop to start. And so that's kind of how that'll work. Again, not that Deontay is out of any guard competition, not that Deontay can't play guard, but we're trying to make sure those guys get a spot to sink their teeth into and really try to improve this offseason.
Is it a must for an offensive lineman coming out in the draft to be position versatile? I mean, like Linderbaum is noted as a center, period.
Yeah.
He's really good.
Sure.
But the fact that, like you say on game day, you only have 8 if you have injuries, I mean, is that a tough knock to overcome?
I would say no. I mean, there's definitely guys that are the really dynamic centers that are going to stay centers for their
Right.
careers. And now you're talking about if you're a backup lineman, guys that get drafted high usually end up being starters. But if you're a backup,
Right.
You generally would prefer to have position flex for that reason. Game day, you get limited numbers, which is why Trey Hill was a nice fit for us. He played some guard, he's played some center. You want guys that are able to snap,
Right.
that are backing up your interior on game days. So, the versatility is always important. It doesn't mean that a guy is, just because you're a center only, it means that you can't be on a team. It just it helps to have versatility inside when you're talking about backups on game day.
I know we're not gonna get a name, but at this point, about a week ahead of the draft, do you have a guy in your mind that, man, this is who I hope is there at 31?
That's the hard part about picking at 31, is that there's always a handful of guys that you like, but you're never really sure if they're going to be there. And then obviously I don't have any say on what happens on the other side of the ball. So there's guys that I think that fit us at that spot on offense. But it's going to be interesting to see how the rest of the league sees some of those guys. Are they going to go earlier? I think there's going to be a lot of guys who are going to get picked off before they get to us, frankly. But there's some really good players in this draft. Some I would hope would fall to us. I don't know that they will, but there's definitely a target range of guys that I think would fit at that pick offensively for us. And then I'm sure Lou has his opinions, and we'll see how that shakes out come Thursday night.
What's your mindset about trading back? I mean, if you say there's a handful of guys that you hope get there, and if say 3 of them get there, I mean, would you, is trading back something that you'd be comfortable with?
I defer to Duke in those situations. He's run a lot more drafts than I have, so that's his job to find the value and where the players fit. I know if there's a guy that they say that fits us at 31, and great, let's do it. If we feel like we can get a guy later and move back and pick up more picks and all those things, and that's Duke's call, and I'll do whatever Duke says. So I don't have any problem with that.
Do you like traits or tape?
Both.
Take one away. You have to. I mean, at a certain point, I mean, I feel like the argument is always coaches want traits and scouts like tape. Gary, is that generalizing too
I would
much?
say I would flip that more.
Really?
I would say you find that this, because to me, that's always the scout's job. The scouts are trying to find characteristics that are good at all levels of the draft. When we all know that there's the top players are the top players. Those guys are going to get picked in the top 20, and they're all going to be relatively regarded as those types of players. But the real work comes from finding the positive qualities in guys that are going to get picked in the 5th and 6th round that might not be as obvious, that aren't high level. Maybe their tape is really good, but their traits are average. And so you're trying to justify which is which. Are they going to be good players because they're good football players because the tape says so? Are the traits can you overcome average traits and still be a good football player? Well, the answer is yeah, of course. There's years of evidence of that. But yeah, I think that when you start getting in, you definitely like to see traits on guys because there's certain things you can't coach. Height, speed, those athletic ability things that you hope work. But again, I've seen it plenty of times the other way where those guys that have traits struggle to play football well sometimes, and that's a very general statement, obviously. But I do think that you ideally want to have both. But I like to watch guys tape. That's my preference. If a guy plays really well, they look good on tape. They play football in the way that you want to see it played. You can get by with some things, but there is also a baseline of measurements, trait-wise, that you try to stay true to what you would not take if they were below a certain benchmark. But again, you start getting into the later parts of the draft, it's kind of all on the table that way. That's the fun part.
Yeah. Do you have, this is kind of a weird question, but do you have anybody from your past that was a tape guy, no traits that you watch coming in the league that you pinpoint when everybody says, I don't know, I've seen this guy that always stood out to you as one of these just a football player? Maybe you didn't.
The guy that'll always stand out to me is we signed Chris Harris as a CFA in Denver, and there was nothing about Chris that was remarkable. He was a good college football player, and he came to Denver, and really he made his mark as a special teams player to start, and then all of a sudden, because he just had the right makeup. He had the skills, the scrappiness, the intelligence that was going to overcome any lack of trait that he might have had. And he ended up being probably one of the best nickels in football for the better part of a decade. So that's probably the one that will always stand out the most. Is a college free agent that came in, made his mark on special teams, and ascended into a really almost dominant position for a long time. And so there was nothing. Chris came in, and he was a very average-looking defensive back that had probably relatively average numbers, but he was a really good football player, and that showed. So that's probably my best one I can give you, but there's more guys like that, I think, if you look over the course of time. But for me personally, Chris will always stand out because of how good he became as a player over his career.
Who's the flat-out best player, best college prospect you saw on tape?
I mean, I would have to argue that Jamar would be up there. He would. He really would for me. I mean, he's, for a guy that produced at college at a high level and then came to the NFL and produced at really the exact same type of level, pretty remarkable impact player that we all felt would be like that, and he probably even exceeded most of those expectations. So, yeah, I mean, Jamar is one of the best on-tape football players from college that translated into being a really pretty hellacious pro.
Do you feel like he has a chance to be one of the NFL's best receivers this year?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I felt like he was last year. The cool thing about Jamar is that a lot of guys probably on the secondary side, different teams, they didn't quite know, because until you see a guy play and you play against him, you don't really know. And I felt like a lot of the defensive backs that we played, is after they played against him, they all realized, oh yeah, he really is, he's that dude, he's that good. And I think that he's earned a lot of people's respect outside, on the other side of the ball, because he's so strong and he's so fast, and sometimes doesn't look like it when you watch him play because it's so easy for him. But I think he's earned respect across the league, and there's a lot of people that feel like he is definitely in that conversation and will be for a long time, hopefully.
Being around the game at a high level for your whole life, were you a draft kid? Were you like doing mock drafts at 12 and stuff?
No, I wasn't. The only thing I did as a kid, which is always, and I say as a kid, I was probably by the time I was in middle school, high school, is I would sit with my dad and we would watch all the quarterbacks every year. So I always had a really good feel for what the quarterback class looked like. More because I just wanted to see guys throw than anything else. I didn't know necessarily about all the other things at that point in my life that go into playing quarterback at the NFL level. But I did watch every draft class for probably, I'd say 5 or 6 years with my dad. At least I knew who they all were. I knew what schools they went to. I knew how they threw the ball, whether I liked how they threw it or not. But that was probably about the extent of my draft knowledge. I didn't spend much time on anything other than that. Was watching guys throw.
You mentioned Chris Harris as an example. There's examples the other way, guys, great college careers, they come fall on their face in the NFL. That's why it's inexact science. So, I mean, intangibles is obviously the big area variable. Which intangible is the most important, do you think, for a guy to have success? I mean, intelligence.
It's really hard to measure those things, you know.
Yeah.
A lot of times you see guys and you meet them and they hit you the right way.
Yeah.
You know, just it's years of talking to guys and seeing what it looks like, and then seeing guys that have those traits. Now, can you put your thumb on it sometimes? No.
Right.
It's hard but there's occasionally a guy that you meet a guy and you go, yep. Whatever that is, he's good. He's got, like, he's going to succeed. He'll find a way to succeed.
Right.
And generally speaking, that tends to bear itself out. There's a mental toughness. There's a mindset of how to go about your work that some guys either have or they can develop to some degree, but there's just something about that trait. I can't put my finger on it necessarily. I'm sure there's some test that could identify something close to that, but there is a mental toughness, professional mindset that some guys have at a young age that allow you to have that intangible however you want to define it.
Yeah.
And it's really difficult to define, but sometimes you just know it when you see it. The guys you tell they have that will that they're not going to fail, and you know sometimes when you see it and they don't have it, you know pretty quickly sometimes. So very, very inexact answer, not very scientific by any stretch, but there's something about certain people that when you meet them, you see that they have something about them that they're going to succeed. And again, there is ways to measure those things to some degree, but I can't do it myself. I just kind of know whether a guy comes across the right way or not.
Yeah.
And that's about all I can probably give you. But yeah, there is a mental side of it, a mental toughness trait that would stick out. That if you could measure, you could make a lot of money probably.
Brian, we don't